tonight. So about a month and a half ago, when I covered for Pastor Pat, we were talking about marriage. Really what we were talking about is just being filled with the Spirit is what we were talking about. But he talked about the topic of what it looked like as we are filled with the Spirit. He says, be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual psalms, saying that there should be a harmony within the church of a body of believers. And then he says that we should submit to one another, okay? That our fellowship, our church should look like no other community group out there. That no matter, even though that there might be leadership, we still are willing to submit to one another. And then he breaks off and goes right into marriage. And he talks about, wives submit to your husbands. And then he says, husbands, you need to love your wives, okay? And so we're just going to carry on that conversation. And he's going to talk about the topic of the parent and child relationship. And then he's going to go and address the employee-employer relationship, where he brings up, he says, bondservants and masters, but it's more of a sense of employee-employer relationship. So let's go ahead and pray. Hopefully you're in Ephesians chapter 6, and then we'll get started. Father, thank you for your word that gives us a clear direction of who you are, who we are in you, Lord, and how we're to work, how we're to live. Lord, just as Pastor Jack taught that, Lord, you have given us all we need for life and godliness. And so, Lord, help us to just yield to your word. God, I pray that we would be filled with your Spirit. Send your Spirit upon us and just continuously fill us, Lord, so that we can be a people unlike anybody else. We can be the people that you have called us to be. God, thank you for this salvation, and thank you for demonstrating your love for us, that while we were yet sinners, Lord, you still sent your Son to die for us. Lord, help us to absorb and know what grace and mercy truly is, Lord, so that we can share it with our family, we can share it with the world who need it most. God, thank you so much for all that you do for us. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So I want to break this off into two chunks. So we're going to be in chapter 6, verse 1, in verses 1 through 9. But I want to pick it up in verse 5 through 9, and then we're going to go back and we're going to cover verses 1 through 4. So in verse 5, chapter 6, verse 5, he says, bondservants, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in sincerity of heart, as to Christ. Not with eye service as men pleasers, but as bondservants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with good will, doing service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good anyone does, he will receive the same from the Lord, whether he is a slave or free. In verse 9, he says, and you masters do the same things to them, giving up threatening, knowing that your own master also is in heaven, and there is no partiality with him. So he addresses bondservants and masters, okay? And back then, our minds starts going into slavery, and this is where the critics start saying, see, the Bible is all about slavery and encourages it. That's not it, okay? As bondservants, those were people that would be willing to service somebody who would provide for them. So it might be a doctor or a cook, or it would be, a housekeeper that would be willing to do something for some master that would provide, obviously, for them, but they would be serving them. So it is very comparable to us in the employee-employer relationship, okay? Now, how many of us know people that they just milk the clock, or they take advantage of their place of work, their place of business, okay? If you talk to a company as they do, reports and where they stand and how they ended up the year, a lot of companies will say our biggest theft comes from the inside, comes from the employees, taking pens, taking, toilet paper, and all kinds of things, okay? So he's saying here that we need to do things to honor our masters. Guys, we can say that we love God, and we can say that, oh, you know what, look at my Bible reading time and my quiet time. But what he says here is the way that we conduct ourselves truly shows our relationship to God. In 1 John, he says, how do you say you love God, but you hate your brother or your sister? Like, how do you say that you love God who you can't see, but you hate the people that you do see? Okay? So he says right here, he says, right at the end, he says, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, in sincerity of heart, as to Christ, not with eye service as men pleasers. Hey, you need to have integrity in your life. We all need to have integrity. And it's very easy for us to do the right thing when people are around us, but we need to be the same person whether we're at work when people are around us, whether we're at church, whether we're at home, or whether there's nobody around us. And that's the whole thing with Cain and Abel. As we read in Genesis where, Cain and Abel, they both offer sacrifices to God, but he rejected Cain. And although Cain was offering a sacrifice to God, Cain wasn't giving his first fruits. He wasn't giving God his best. He wanted the appearance of looking like he was a worshiper. He wanted the appearance of he was sacrificing to God, but he truly wasn't sacrificing to God, and that was his problem. And he's telling us here, don't do that. Don't be like that. Give your all to your bosses. Don't take advantage of them. We have to be an example to those around us, especially if they know we're Christians. They shouldn't know that we're Christians because we have, a mug that says, I love Jesus, and, you tipped up the cup and it says, turn or burn, or, you know what I mean? Like, we shouldn't, that's not how they should know that we're Christians. They should just know that there is something about us that is unlike anybody else. And whether we're having a good day, a bad day, no matter what we're going through, we are going to bring light to that job. I was reading a book, and they were talking about how they did this test. And so what they did is they went to the employee break room, and they had a price list of all the costs of what it would take, if you got a cup of coffee and some sugar, creamer, maybe a snack. And they had a price list listed, and then underneath it, they had an honesty box. And so whatever the cost was, you were supposed to, be honest about it and put that money in. The test was this. They wondered if people gave because they were just going to give, or if there were circumstances that would cause them to give. So on the background of the paper, it would change from week to week, in a random order. And sometimes it was just a blank piece of paper. Sometimes it was, some kind of scenery like flowers or trees, just whatever it was. And then other times, there would be eyes painted on the paper. And as they did the study, they noticed that the time that the box was in balance with what was taken was the times that there were eyes painted on the paper. We have this tendency that when somebody's watching us, right, when Big Brother's watching, that we will do the right thing. And the guy in the book is like, well, we should always be doing the right thing. Well, yeah, and as Christians, we should be doing the right thing because we know God is with us. And it shouldn't be like, oh, well, God's watching me, so I'm going to do this. But we should have that integrity because we are called to be a different people. He goes on to say, for the masters in verse 9, he says, and you masters, do the same things to them. Do what same things? Show respect. If you expect the people that are working for you to respect you, then you should be giving them the same respect. Giving up threatening, knowing that your own master also was in heaven and there is no partiality with him. See, back in that culture, they used to think that, hey, you know what, since, look at all the things that I have and I need to have servants, well, obviously I must be favored by the gods. And that was their mind frame back then. And he's saying that's not the case. Our God has no partiality. And no matter what we're doing, we should know that we can honor God whatever the role is. And especially during this time, because there would be situations where there would be a slave and a master relationship, and then they would go together to worship at church, and then that slave would have some kind of leadership in the church over the master. And so how would it look participating in a worship service and being in church, and you have a slave that's cheating the system, cheating that boss, and now he's some kind of elder or some kind of leader in the church? What's that going to look like? And it's crazy because if you think about it, the church is like that. On Sundays, my 5th grade teacher attends service. And it's absolutely crazy. Because I guarantee you, the first time he probably saw me, he's like, what in the world is he doing up there? Like, I remember what kind of student he was. But, and now it's crazy because now it's different. So there's some of us where we come to church also, and we see other people, and what do we think? What do they think of us? Do we have to go to a different service because if they see us, they know how we act at church, we know the things that we talk about, they know maybe, our conduct and what we're doing, and we don't want to be made out? We shouldn't be living in such a way. Now I want to cover verses 1 through 4. I was talking to some people and they're like, that's cool that you're thinking about teaching about children, but, I don't have any children anymore, or I'm single, and so don't check out. If you're single or you guys don't have kids, don't check out. Because here's the one thing that we do all have in common. All of us in here are somebody's kids. And all of us have been affected and impacted by either good or bad parenting, regardless of it, but we know the effects of it. And some of us have been blessed to have really good parents, and there's a few others where it's not been so great. And I need to just backtrack just a little bit. When he says in chapter 5, just a few verses back, where he says in chapter 5, verse 31, he says, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." We can have the understanding when it comes to marriage that, all right, obviously I need to leave I need to leave my parents' house, I need to be with my spouse, and obviously I'm not going to rely on my parents to support me. That we can understand. But some of us have never left the impact, the ideas, the things that had gone on while we were growing up, and we haven't left our mother and father truly. And we're affected. Have you ever talked to somebody that's like, well, especially a married couple, and this is the one that I feel for the most, where there's a couple that's married and they have kids, and one spouse is like, well, I won't go to church because when I was growing up, my parents drug me to church, and I don't want to do that to my kids, or I don't want to go to church. An individual like that hasn't left their mother and father. They are still bringing that baggage into that relationship. And if we really think about it, how many things have we brought into our marriage relationship from our parents, from growing up, and it has affected and it's put a strain on our marriage and it's put a strain on our family life. So when he says they should leave, we have to have that. So maybe you grew up in a bad home. Maybe your dad wasn't a good dad. And for some people, that brings a bad taste in their mouth. They can accept Jesus and Jesus died for me, but they have a hard time when it comes to the fatherhood of God because they didn't have a good father. And somebody might say, well, shoot, my father was never in my life. Yeah, but the fact that he was never in your life has still impacted your life. And that empty seat at the dinner table and that empty place during Christmas time that hasn't been there has affected you. And unless we are able to forgive that, we will never be able to move forward. So as we unpack this, we need to really think about this. Because, guys, all we need to do is turn on the news, look outside, and our culture is just going downhill. And we can look at Gen Z, we can look at the millennials and be like, man, they're so jacked up. But who's responsible for them? We are. And no, I might not be responsible for all the decisions that my children make, but I have to take ownership on the influence that I've had on them and what I allowed in their life and what I've allowed to influence them. And as we look at Adam and Eve in the very beginning, when the serpent came to Eve and deceived her and she ate of it, he had a choice to make at that point when she offered it to him. And he didn't, and he just went along with it. As parents, we have to be leading our families. For you single moms, if you're a dad, you need to lead your family, because if you don't, Satan will lead your family. So this is what he says as we get through it. We're going to read these verses. He says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment, with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth." Verse 4, "And you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord." Some of your translations say, "in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." Don't bring your children up to wrath. In Colossians, it's very similar. And it says, don't provoke your kids, because you're going to lead them into discouragement. So yes, children are supposed to obey. And I know some of you are like, oh man, I wish my kids were in here to hear it. No, we just went through the 10 Commandments like 3 weeks ago, and I promise you, they got an earful of it. Because, whether it's me or any one of the teachers, we are constantly telling them, all right, maybe there are things that you can't do, that the Bible says because, you obviously don't have a spouse or you don't have, property or other things. But we challenge the kids and try to stimulate their thinking, like, but what is it that you can do? What does God say for you to do? And the kids will be like, honor our mothers and fathers. Okay, well, what does that look like? So I promise you, they got an earful, okay? But listen to what he says and how he brings this up. He says, in verse 2, he says, honor your mother and father, which is the first commandment with promise, not with threat. Because a lot of the times we'll tell our kids, you better obey me. It's a threat. That's not how God is with us. When we look at God, and what do we hold on to with God? We hold on to the promises of God. And some of you might say, well, it is a promise that I give to my kids. I tell them, it's not a threat, it's a promise. No, that's not right either, right? That's not appropriate. Now, we need to backtrack. He says, children, in verse 1, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Now, as you guys know, Pastor Ryan's in Bisbee, and then I ended up also taking on the high school ministry. And as we were doing the transition, I told the high schoolers, I said, hey, I want you guys to write on a card anything that you have a question about, and we're going to make it anonymous so that way you guys feel comfortable, because I want to answer any questions that I can. And one of the questions that came up was, how do I honor my parents if they're non-believers? Let's just think about that, okay? And I'm going to give a broad sense. So I'm not saying that all unbelievers are like this, but just think of where this kid might be. He might be in a home where his parents or her parents, whoever it was, those parents allow them and are like, hey, you know what? I'm going to be out of town, so, there's alcohol in the fridge, and so if you invite some friends over, just make sure that nobody's drinking and driving, or just make sure, you know what I mean? They're giving this kid, free reign. And like I said, I'm not saying that all parents are like that are non-believers or that aren't following after the Lord, but chances are there isn't any kind of resistance to their behavior. Or what about the parent that it's like, especially in high school, right? Hey, well, guess what? You're old enough, so here's some birth control, and son, here's some condoms, so, just be safe. That's not right. So how is a child supposed to honor their parents in the Lord if the parents aren't believers? And I had to tell that child, hey, look, you know what's right and what's appropriate. And if your parents are like saying, hey, you can go ahead and do this, you can go ahead and do this, if you choose not to do it, that's not going to not honor them. Just because they're pushing you for it or making it available for you, that doesn't mean that you have to take it. You have to know what God says and who he wants you to be and what he's calling you to do, and that's what you have to honor. And by that, you will still honor those parents. Because what parent isn't going to get mad that you weren't doing something that you should? You know what I mean? They're not going to get mad. But what about for our kids? Honor your father and mother in the Lord. How do our kids see obedience? Well, first let me ask you this. How do kids learn? Kids learn by watching and by doing. And it's important that we have integrity, just like we talked about the work life, that we have integrity. Because our kids are going to see that. We shouldn't lie to our kids. One thing that my wife and I did when we had the twins is we talked about certain things, and my wife, she's like, we're going to choose to not lie to the kids. And I don't see any young kids in here. Look, if you brought young kids in here, we're having adult conversations in here. You're going to have to suffer the repercussions of this, okay? My wife said, we're not going to have our kids believe in fictitious characters that's celebrated during certain seasons, okay? I'm trying to tiptoe, okay? Because I don't want somebody mad. Like somebody's going to call in and be like, "You busted me," and you said, right? So we agreed that we weren't gonna have them believe in fictitious characters. Because here's the thing, that when I read to you guys about that honesty box, right now I'm reading Richard Dawkins' book that he just put out. This is an atheist, and he is writing to the younger generation, and he's writing to a generation of kids that are growing up in a Christian home, and he's trying to sway them. And so I was aware of it, and I'm like, well, that's the target group that I minister to. What is the other side saying? And he brings that up. He's like, all right, so he brings up that honesty box, and he said, so when they had this thing, people will do the right thing when they think somebody's watching, just like during a holiday season when he knows, right? And so when they find out the truth about that, guess what's going to happen? Well, what about Jesus? What about God? Are you just trying to tell me something so that way I'm trying to be obedient? Guys, we walk by faith, not by sight. And how many times do we doubt, man, is God really there? We have our doubts. And let me tell you something. Satan wants you to believe your doubts and to doubt your beliefs. So my wife was like, hey, you know what? We're not going to do that. And it was hard. It was so hard. There was one year that our boys, they're like, Dad, please give him a chance. And please. And I'm like, look, I know it's difficult. And it was very hard. And we had to tell them, look, don't go around school telling everybody and diming it out. Like, and I praise God that he like didn't have them blurt it out, right? Because they would come home and they're like, Dad, are you sure he's not real? Because, so-and-so, everybody at school believes it. Like, son, I'm not lying to you. I'm not lying to you. And so one time they're like, Dad, please give him a chance. Please give him a chance. And I'm like, look, and we had the presents all under the tree. And I was like, look, I said, we'll give him a chance, but this is what's going to happen. We're going to load the presents into the car, and we're going to go give it away to kids that really, truly need it, okay? I said, and we'll give him a chance, and we'll see what happens in the morning. But I'm telling you right now, if there's nothing there, you're not getting anything, okay? I said, so you take it, and they're like, okay, you know what I mean? And now they're growing up, and they're like, wow, you guys didn't lie to us. Hey, guys, he says here, don't provoke your kids to wrath. When somebody calls you, you're like, tell them I'm not here. Don't tell them I'm here. Like, don't do that. They're watching what we're doing, okay? And so we have to be very careful, because here's the thing. We're growing these kids up, and then we're sending them out. And let me tell you, you need to be mindful of the people that we're sending them out to. Aren't worried about the protection of our children. Let me tell you, this is from a college professor. Okay, Richard Rorty, he says, he's a professor. He says, professors should see their work in the classroom as nothing less than an exercise in conversion. They ought to arrange things so that students who enter as bigoted, homophobic, religious fundamentalists will leave college with views more like our own. He says, students are lucky to find themselves under the benevolent instructions of people like me, and to have escaped the grip of their frightening, vicious, dangerous parents. Parents, he writes, ought to be forewarned that we are going to go right on trying to discredit you in the eyes of your children, trying to strip your fundamentalist religious community of dignity, trying to make your views seem silly rather than discussable. He says, and that's what's going to happen to every child that walks through my classroom. Now, I'm not saying that every professor is like that, but there's lots of professors that agree in that same sense. And if our kids' faith isn't strong, they're going to walk away from it. Guys, the biggest thing on my heart being, overseeing children's ministry, seeing the high schoolers, I've seen too many kids that just walk away from their faith. Yes, some of them do walk back. Hey, some of us, we've been in that boat. We walked away from our faith, but we came back. But what they're saying now is that with the millennials and Gen Z, they're getting to a place where they might not come back. So how do we do it? How do we give a faith that sticks? I was, as I was getting ready to prepare for this, I was listening to, child psychologists and other talks, and there was a family therapist that I listened to that I was so angry. She said, we are in a place now where we shouldn't be trying to impose our will on our children and trying to fit them to be who we want it to be just because we're trying to live vicariously through them. And so we need to stop trying to get our will and trying to tell them who they ought to be and who they believe they are and all this other stuff. Guys, that doesn't work anywhere. As a matter of fact, that statement in itself is a self-defeating statement. Because you telling me that I shouldn't impose my will on my children, you're imposing your will on me not to impose my will on you know what I mean? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And let's just think of this rationally. Let's say my kid's gonna get ready to drive. And it's like, okay, you got your permit, let's drive. But guess what? I'm not going to impose my will on you. So if you want to run the red lights, go right ahead. If you don't want to, if you see, you know what? If a cop starts putting its lights on and starts chasing us, don't let him impose his will on you. Just keep going. And then listen, and we laugh, but people think like, oh man, that was so deep. And you know what? I remember being that parent. I remember thinking, you know what? When my kids get older, I'm going to teach them how to drink. And so that way they'll be responsible and they'll know how to handle their liquor. What an idiot. I'm going to teach a kid that, first of all, the kid that wouldn't even be of age. That's against the law. So we have these ideas of things that we want to do, and the further we get away from the Bible, the more things get foggy and there's more confusion. You would figure, we're getting ready to enter in a new decade. 2020 is just weeks away. And you would figure with advanced technology, we would be much further along and much smarter. There was a psychologist that says from the year of 2007 to 2015, think about this. Hey, I'm not going to impose my will on kids. So they're probably going to be happier. From 2007 to 2015, rates of suicide between children and teenagers doubled. Why? Because they have no idea who they are. They have no idea who they are. Chuck Swindoll read this to his congregation. He said, "The goal, of course, is to turn boys into men and shape the will of our daughters so they become ladies." So I wrote 5 things that I think, personally, will provoke our kids to wrath. Parenting out of guilt. Lots of us are probably a part of a blended family. Okay? I know my family is a blended family. And I know because of what had happened to our older kids in a divorce, that you have that tendency and you want to parent out of guilt, or you want to be the better parent or the cooler parent, right? And so we start parenting out of guilt. Or, hey, you know what? Maybe you can't provide certain things for your kids, so instead of providing all kinds of stuff for them, you parent out of guilt, so you do everything for your kid. And so we start doing things that our kids are perfectly capable of doing, and we think, hey, you know what? If they do it, it's going to take 15 minutes, and if I do it, it's just going to be 15 seconds. So we start parenting out of guilt, right? On the onset, and then they reach a certain age, and now we really have to parent out of guilt, because it's now the kid doesn't know how to do laundry, the kid doesn't know how to make their own meals, and now it's well, I'm not going to force them to start doing things on their own because I didn't do it in the first hand, so I'm just going to parent out of guilt, and I'm going to continue to do it for them. And so you continue to make food for them, you cut the crust off their bread, and it's Mom, I'm 32 years old, you know what I mean? But it happens. Proverbs tells us that we are to train kids in the way that they should go, not in the way that we want them to go. In the way that guys, we are not to form or mold our kids. We are to guide our kids. Another way that we will provoke our kids to wrath is favoritism, right? The compromise, the comparison, not the compromise, the comparison, right? Where it's well, look at what Johnny does. Or within families, right? Why aren't you more like your brother? Why aren't you more like your sister? Your sister doesn't do this. Your brother doesn't do this. Man, that breaks the spirit. Look at Joseph. What happened? That happened to Joseph, right? And what happened to Joseph's brothers? Did that encourage them? No, they got upset. They wanted to kill him. And instead, they're hey, you know what? Instead of killing him, let's get some money from him. And they sold Joseph into slavery. Performance-based parenting, right? This could be the parent, and you know what? And military dads, we are the most guilty of this, right? Because it's not even so much as a performance hey, I'm just driving you to do good. No, we're I'm just giving you tough love. Well, man, give me a hug once in a while. Or take me out to ice cream. And we have this performance base, and the only time that anything's coming out of our mouth is when something negative, that our kids are doing something negative. We're supposed to be giving encouragement to our kids. Kevin Lehman says for every one negative thing that you say to your kids, you need to say 10 positive things for them. Because think of it, how many of us, we can hear the things that were told to us as kids. We don't remember all the good things. Oh man, but we can sure pull up things that were told to us negatively. Inconsistency. Inconsistency of parenting, right? This is, false threats. If you do this, you're grounded for life, right? Or, you know what? You're grounded for the rest of the year. Or you're grounded for the rest of the week. And then the morning comes and they're it's Saturday, can I go play with my friends? And you're yeah, you know what? I don't even want to deal with you. Go ahead and go. So that inconsistency, because this is what ends up happening. The kids want to get whatever freedom they can. They're going to test it. It's just a given. And so now you need to bring the heat on for the next time. Well, you're not grounded for a year, you're grounded for 2 years. You know what I mean? And it just goes on and you can't do it. And what ends up happening is now there's a power struggle. Okay? And you see this, I know I'm guilty of this, right? And so now I'm in a place where I'm instead of having the authority over my kids, now we're battling out and arguing. And then instead of just, hey, I said no and walking away, I'm having an argument with my kids and I lower myself down to them and I stop becoming dad and I start becoming big brother. That's what happens when we start arguing with our kids. And so then we start pulling the big sister, big brother card and like, well, you know what? I'm bigger than you, so go to your room. But we don't say that. We say, I'm the parent, you go to your room. What do they say about leadership? The moment you as a leader say, I'm the leader, you listen to me, or I'm the boss, that just shows that you're really, truly not in charge. And not so much inconsistency on how we treat them, but inconsistency within our own lives. Hey, you can't watch this stuff. You can't talk like that. But then we go to a barbecue and our friends and our kids hear us talking differently with our friends. Or, we put them to bed and, we're watching some kind of movie and it's like, hey, go to bed, you can't be watching this. Well, then why are you watching it? Hey, and I get it. Hey, there's some things that kids shouldn't watch, and I'm not even saying that it's something inappropriate, you know what I mean? Like, like blood and guts and all kinds of stuff. And I get it, little kids shouldn't be watching that, but at the same token, what do you think it does to them when they come in and they see you watching it? The last thing we want to do is tell our kids, do as I say, not as I do. That is only going to provoke our kids to wrath. So as I said, Chuck Swindoll said, the goal is to turn boys into men and shape the will of our daughters to become ladies. He says, boys play house, but men get married. Boys make babies, men rear children. Boys won't raise their own children, men will raise someone else's. Boys seek to simply survive their women's disrespect, men seek to understand her with their heart. Boys are content with female companionship, men welcome intimacy. Boys seek popularity, men win respect. Boys cast blame, men own responsibility. Boys invent excuses for their failure, men produce strategies for success. Boys are narcissistic and self-indulgent, men are selfless and sacrificial. There's another guy that I was looking for, like, okay, well, I know we can plug in girl in that sense, but here's a few for girls. A girl will do what she can to flaunt her body. Women respect their bodies. Girls will make excuses for their mistakes. Women will own up to their mistakes. Girls will look for someone else to take care of her. Women will do whatever it takes to provide and support. Girls look to gain attention from people around her. A woman looks to gain respect from her husband's family. A girl seeks arm candy so she can show off. A woman seeks more than just good looks. And then this going back to Chuck Swindoll, this is what he says. He says, you are growing up young women and young men who will one day say, I do, and will hear I do. And as they link their lives with another individual for the rest of their days, think of what you are providing that spouse. As you prepare your son or daughter for adulthood, if they leave their stuff laying around, they're going to leave their stuff laying around when they marry. If they excuse wrongdoing when they're single, they will excuse wrongdoing when they're married. What you don't deal with, their mate will have to. What you don't address, the policeman will. And what you overlook and ignore will be left to the teacher to have to deal with. We have a book that we live by. We have God's word. He doesn't leave us in confusion. He tells us who we are. And it just boggles my mind that we're in a place of gender confusion, and right in the beginning of the Bible, it's very specific that he created them male and female. God knew it from the get-go what was going to happen. And it wasn't like he just created people. He wasn't vague in that matter. He was very specific to that. And here we are, advanced in our society, and we're confused about gender? That doesn't make any sense. Some of you have heard me say this, but, if somebody's walking a dog and you ask them, hey, is that a male or a female? The owner's not going to say, well, the dog didn't tell me. I don't know. You're going to be like, look, is there a twig and berries or not? Like, it's a boy or a girl? Like, it's very simple, you know what I mean? Like, we're confused about what bathroom we're going to use? Why? Because the further we get from here, the further we're going to go down. And you know what? I don't approve of what the culture is doing. But I'm not trying to make the culture believe what I believe in. Because this is what I believe is going to happen. Just like we saw the statistics between 2007 and 2015, the bottom is going to drop out. but the church needs to be the church. Right after this section, Paul goes into the armor of God. And he says, yo, prepare. The whole time during Ephesians, he's like, hey, you need to walk worthy of your calling. And you need to walk, and you need to walk, and you need to walk. And then he says, now, stand and suit up. He gives us armor because there's going to come a time where we need to be the church. We need to raise our kids because somebody's going to try and somebody's waiting to sway our kids otherwise. And James Dobson said it best. Rules without relationship equal rebellion. Nobody has ever been won over by harsh discipline. They've always been won over by love. And that's exactly how God won us over. And so the bottom's going to drop out, and we need to be the church because those people are going to be hurting, and they're going to be looking for truth. They're going to be looking for comfort. They're going to be super confused, thinking, I thought this was going to make me happy, and realize that it didn't. And that's when we will get to shine the brightest and be able to minister to those people and bring them in and love on them and let them know who God says that they are. And as we suit up, guys, he gives us an armor, not so that we can be all shiny and nice and, hey, look at me, like, look at how, look at my chest plate. It's so, you know what? I pray that when I get there, I got fiery arrows like stuck all over my shield because I was protecting people. I got a helmet that's all dented in, thinking like, man, I just barely made it. Stepping into the role as a pastor was super scary because I hear and know of families and children's pastors growing up where the children just walk away from the Lord. And that's like something that I'm just like, I don't want to put my family on the altar of ministry. And then I take a look around and I look at Pastor Jack. And Pastor Jack has Jason and Becky and Samantha and Stephen, Audrey and Richie and their kids all around him. And it's Jack and Jody. And I can't tell you how encouraging that is to see that. And I pray that for my family. I know I haven't done the best job, especially with our older kids. And being a part of a blended family, I made so many mistakes because I didn't know how to be a parent with my older kids. But as I'm learning, I'm trying to do my very best to just win their hearts over. So don't be discouraged. If you're in a blended family, especially, I promise you, step parent, you have the hardest job. Because I have biological kids and kids that are stepkids, and I never address them as my stepchildren, but I do have, a pair of biological and step. And my biological kids are super easy. I never wonder where I am with them. But with my older kids, it's very difficult, and they have a dad that is in their life, and just trying to draw those, it's super hard. So if you are part of it, I feel for you, and I know it's hard, but don't lose discouragement, and don't allow the enemy to take that away and rob you of your joy. Guys, if you're in this situation, this whole talk has been about being a spirit-filled believer. And if your family needs help, your marriage needs help, your kids need help, guys, that's what we're here for. We're not here so that you can partner with us. We're here so that we can partner with you and help in whatever way possible. And it's up to us. God has put us during this generation, in this time period, where it's just getting darker and darker, and we get to shine brighter and brighter. Be encouraged by that. Let's stand up and pray.